Hi, I'm Tasha Shelton, Career Services Coordinator with both the Business and Technology Campus and the Blue River Campus. Today, we're going to talk about resume writing and how you can use that as your marketing tool. It is probably more important than ever to have a really good resume to get yourself in front of employers, as the time for walking into a business and asking for an application and filling out a application on the spot and handing in your resume doesn't happen very often anymore. And so more likely you're going to be applying for jobs online. And so you need to have a really good resume to get you in the front door. In addition to a high unemployment rate, a lot of people are now going to be applying for single positions. And so recruiters aren't going to have the time to spend to really do a deep dive into every single application and every single resume that they receive. Most recruiters, most employers are going to spend between 10 and 15 seconds to review your resume. So you have a very short period of time to capture their attention so that you get an opportunity with that employer. So that perfect resume, you can catch their attention and attract that employer so that you don't lose out on that opportunity. You want to be in the save file and not the throwaway file. So why is a resume needed? Why is it so important? That document summarizes both your educational and your professional qualifications, indicating why you're the best candidate for the position. Your competition is going to be extremely tough out there, especially if you are applying for positions with fellow classmates that may be going through the same program, getting the same training, same education as you are. So you need to figure out, why are you the best person? Your resume is designed to get you face to face with that employer. Again, you're going to be applying online. And so this single document is what's going to capture the attention to that employer and helps you make a very favorable first impression. If you have a resume that is riddled with errors all throughout it, you're not going to make a very good first impression. Most of the time, they're going to think that you have poor attention to detail, that you don't care to put your best foot forward. All of those are qualities that an employer is definitely not looking for. So, what should your resume do for you? Okay. Couple of things. It needs to communicate who you are and what you have to offer. What's your education? What are your training? What are your skills? What are you bringing to the table? What accomplishments have you had? Emphasize all of those strong points that you can bring to the table and add value to that employer. You only want to include items that directly pertain to the position for which you are applying. So I tell people, don't put a lot of fluff into your resume. So for example, let's use fast food. Oftentimes, students have had fast food experience, and maybe they're not real excited about putting that on their resume. But employers look at somebody who has spent some time in fast food and they've been there for a while. They know that they've developed some really key skills that they're looking for. Oftentimes, they have to work in a very fast-paced environment. They also have to do a lot of problem solving, especially with customers. That customer service aspect is very important. A lot of times they're trained to work in multiple departments. So those are very important qualities that an employer would be looking for. Also, you might have been asked to do some cash handling. But if cash handling is not a skill that you're going to need moving on to your next profession, that's something that you don't want to put on there. Okay? You also want to make sure that you use results-oriented action verbs, such as managed, operated, experienced, expanded on. Those are action verbs. And you can Google action verbs for resumes, and you'll get a very long list of them that you can use to incorporate into your resume to help you describe the things that you've done. You also always want to accompany your resume with a cover letter. We're not going to talk about cover letters today. There will be a separate video for that. But a cover letter is very important to help you tell more of the story behind you that you can't always include in a resume. For example, A student that I worked with before, when we looked at her resume, her work history was very spotty. She didn't stay at one job for very long. We've all heard those stories about employers not wanting to hire people who have a work history where they kind of jump around from job to job. But as we sat and talked about her work history, she explained to me that her husband was in the Army. Anybody who knows anybody that's in the Army knows that every 2 or 3 years they PCS and they move to a different location. And it was her job, her responsibility to pack up the house, get the kids ready, move to the new location, unpack the house, get the kids back in school, and then it was time for her to search for a job. That always didn't happen right away. And so sometimes she would work for a year, maybe a year and a half, and then she'd have to quit. So again, that cover letter tells that story that isn't always included in a resume. In addition, if the application says that a cover letter is an optional item, you always want to include that cover letter because it shows that you're willing to go above and beyond just the bare minimum requirements. Keep in mind the application process, part of that is to see how well you are willing to jump through the hoops and do the things that are necessary and that they ask for you to do. So let's now talk about the different parts of that resume. This won't necessarily be in any sort of order, but we'll talk about an ordering of it later on. Your resume should always have a heading. It's absolutely okay to use your common name. It's not a legal document, so you don't have to use your legal given name, but you want to make sure that employers can connect any sort of legal documents that you might have, such as transcripts or driver's license where you might have that name listed on there. You want to include a professional email address. If you remember, one of the points that we made about your resume was this was your opportunity to make a favorable first impression. So skankyho43@gmail is not a professional email address. Okay? You can use your school email address, you can use a regular Gmail or a Yahoo or something like that, but just make sure it's professional. Your first name, last name, some combination is always best. Make sure that you have a good working phone number. But in addition to that working phone number, you need to think about what your voicemail says that is attached to your phone. Think about what impression it gives if an employer is trying to reach out to you. You don't want to have a message that comes across as flippant or will give them the wrong perception. So if you haven't checked your voicemail, you need to do that and make sure that it is professional. Also, if you're one of those persons that includes just the default voicemail that says you've reached 816-604-5226, please leave a message, you might want to consider going in and changing it so that it is simply something like, you've reached Tasha Shelton, I can't get to the phone right now, please leave a message, I'll get back to you as soon as I can. The reason you don't want to use that default one is many times employers or a recruiter, if they're calling, may not leave pertinent employment information on a voicemail that they're not sure of who they have reached. So those are the things that are really needed in that heading: your name, your email address, and your phone number, because that's exactly how they're going to try and reach out to you. Now, some optional items to think about is your address. And if you want to put your address on there, city and state are sufficient. You don't have to put the whole street address. It's very rare that you will get snail mail based on your resume. When you complete an official application, that's when you'll provide them your full address. Something else to think about is social media. 92% of all recruiters do look at social media when they are in the job search process or they're searching to hire. And so that means Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, all of those are social medias that get sought through by recruiters. If you do not have a digital presence in 2020, or if you've got everything locked down and hidden so they can't find you, the perception that recruiters get is that you're trying to hide something. So you do want to make sure that there is a digital footprint out there where recruiters can find you. And I always suggest LinkedIn. LinkedIn is that professional social media that basically is your resume, your education, your work experience. All of those things are tied into that account. And you can just include that URL right there in the heading of your resume to help employers find you. There will be a separate video that talks about how to establish your LinkedIn account and the best way to set that up. So make sure that you watch for that. Okay, the next part of your resume is something called the professional profile. It may be a summary of qualifications, a professional summary, however you want to word it. This part of the resume takes the place of what used to be called the objective statement. So if you pull out your resume and you blow the dust off of it and there is an objective statement on there, take that objective statement off, because generally it says something to the effect of, my objective is to get a job with XYZ company, to use my education, my training to help them advance, blah, blah, blah. Okay, that's something I already know. Okay, you're applying for this job. I know you want this job. I have 10 seconds to read your resume, and you've just wasted 3 of those seconds reading something that I already know. So the professional profile or the summary of qualifications is really important because it highlights your accomplishments and your experiences that meet the need of the employer. And this is where I tell students to go to that job posting and print it off and look at the description of the job. Take a highlighter, highlight all of those things that you know how to do or you can do that basically stuck out in your mind when you read it that says, hey, I'm qualified for this job. It could be that you have an associate's degree. It could be that you have your universal EPA certification. It could be that you have experience with social media and marketing. Maybe they're looking for somebody with some accounting. Maybe they're looking for somebody who has a special driver's license or is bilingual. Those are the things that you need to put in there, either in a bulleted list, or it could just be some fragmented sentences. The purpose of this section is to entice the recruiter to read the rest of your resume. I often refer to this section as the movie trailer of your resume, because the purpose of a movie trailer is to convince you to see the rest of the movie. This is the movie trailer for your resume. If I'm a recruiter and I look at this first section and I check off 3 or 4 or 5 things that you already have that I want, I'm definitely going to look the rest of the resume over. Professional experience or work history. Now, depending on what career path you're going into, if your work history falls in line with your new job that you're looking for, then you want to highlight that work experience a little bit higher up in your resume. If you're changing career paths, or this is your first career job, you may want to put your work history or your professional experience at the bottom of your resume and highlight your education and training that way. Work history is very important. It shows that you know how to hold a job, that you know how to jump through the hoops to maintain a job. It just depends on where you put it in your resume that makes sense with what is important to that employer. One thing I always encourage students to do is to research their chosen career on ONET. ONET is the Department of Labor's website, and you can Google ONET. You can type your career path in the search box up in the right-hand corner, and then you can select from the list that they give you the type of job or career path that you want going forward. And the reason I tell students to do this is because you really need to understand what are the skills, what's the knowledge that you need for your chosen career. So as you start to go back and you add your work history, you can choose those things that are relevant to your career path going forward. Remember that cash handling example. If you're not handling cash, don't put it on your resume. Okay? You want to do this in reverse chronological order. Start with the most recent job and work backwards. Include any past and current positions where you've gained experience, even volunteer work. Okay? This is not paid work history, it's experience, okay? And volunteer work is just as important, or hobbies or side gigs or something like that is just as important as some sort of paid occupation. Describe your contributions to the position. That's where you want to use those results-oriented action verbs. What responsibility did you assume? Okay. You only need to go back and include 10 years worth of work history unless there's more relevant work history beyond that 10 years. This is also where you might want to include military experience. For any of our veterans out there, you can put your military experience in your professional work history, or you can choose to include a section of its own with your military experience and your training. It's kind of up to you as to how you want to do this. Okay, as far as education, again, like your work history, you're going to do this in reverse chronological order. You're going to start with your most recent education, which should be Metropolitan Community College, and you're going to work backwards. Now, for MCC, when you list it on your resume, you just need to list Metropolitan Community College. You do not need to list Blue River, Longview, Penn Valley, Maple Woods, Business and Technology. You don't need to list the specific campuses because your transcript is really only going to say Metropolitan Community College. Okay? You only need to list the month and year of your graduation. And even if you have not graduated, you can say anticipated completion, December 2020, or something like that. You can be very specific or need to be very specific about the degree that you're getting, and don't abbreviate it. If you're getting an Associate of Arts with an emphasis in teaching, that's what you need to put. If you're getting an Associate of Applied Science in Heating, Ventilation, Air Conditioning, and Refrigeration, put that down. If you're only getting a certificate, a welding construction certificate, that's what you need to put on there. As far as your GPA, you can include your GPA if it's over 3.0. You can also list if you've been on the dean's list, if you've been active in any clubs or organizations, especially if you've held an office position in that group. Any sort of projects that you may be involved in, I would put that on there and demonstrate how active and engaged you've been in your education. For some programs, you might think about listing courses that are very specific to your degree, especially if they are relevant. Not necessary to list like your general education classes, but very specific, maybe accounting, software classes, any of the engineering where you're using maybe Revit or something like that. Or if you are in the CTE programs, list those specific courses because that helps people get an understanding of what your training actually was. Now, if you have attended another college, this is where you have some options. You can put that college education on there I would definitely put that college education on there if you completed a degree. If you did not complete a degree, let's say you went for a semester at State Fair Community College, probably would not put it on there unless you really want to. That is completely up to you. The one thing that you don't want to put on your education, and a lot of people want to put it on there, is their high school diploma or their GED. This information is not needed because you had to have one of those two things to get into at least MCC, and therefore it's automatically assumed because you went to college that one of those two things you do have. The only thing that will happen by putting your high school diploma or your GED on your resume is it will tell a little bit about your age. And that's something that can be used to discriminate against you. We don't want to give our age away or put any sort of discriminatory information on a resume. So last thing, just some do's and don'ts. You definitely want to present yourself accurately. And if you're talking about your skill set and you're putting your skill set on there, and let's say that you say that you're bilingual and that you are proficient in both written and spoken language, you want to make sure that you are proficient. There is a certain level of understanding that the word proficient means. If you have basic knowledge of Spanish, Put down that you have basic knowledge and you can communicate. That's different from proficient. Okay, if you say you have your universal EPA certification, make sure that you have your universal EPA certification. You want to make sure that your resume is very easy to read and pleasing to the eye. And so bullets are going to be your best friend. Bullets help the eye travel down the page and pick out information very easily. And so again, you want to make sure that the person who's reading it can get that information rather quickly. You also want to tailor the content to the employer. The day of making one resume and sending it out to 50 different employers, that doesn't really happen anymore. Every employer has their own unique individual needs. And so you'll need to kind of tweak different parts of your resume depending on what it is that you're applying for and who you're applying to. It becomes very obvious if you just send a bland general resume out to every single employer. Proofread. I cannot stress this enough. Proofread, 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 proofread again, have somebody else proofread it. And not just for grammar and spelling, but also things like font size, the type of font that you're using, whether it's italicized, it's bolded, all of that formatting needs to be the same, whether you're using punctuation or not using punctuation. I've been amazed at the number of resumes that I've received where people have just copied and pasted off of the internet, and then you don't bother to change the font or the font size, and it's just all over the place. Okay, so check those things. Everything needs to be perfect. You do not need to include salary requirements on your resume. I don't want to see that. I don't need to see references on there. Oftentimes people try to list who their supervisors are, or they have a bottom piece that says, here are my references. That needs to be on a separate sheet, and that is not something that you send with your initial resume. So let's talk about references for just a few moments. I always advise students to get 6 references, 3 personal, 3 professional. None of them should be family members. Personal references are those people that can speak to your character. That may be a neighbor, it may be a teacher, it could be a faculty member at MCC, it could be a clergyman, somebody like that who can talk about the type of person that you are. Okay, that's personal. You also need 3 professional references, and a professional reference is somebody who has supervised you in the past. That could be a supervisor at a former job. It also could be a faculty member who has, worked with you in a lab class or something like that. That would be a professional reference as well. For each of those people, you need to have their name, their title, where they work, phone number, and email address. And I would put all of that information on a separate sheet of paper, and I would have that saved somewhere that you can easily access it to. Because inevitably, you're going to be applying for a job. It's due on midnight on Sunday night, and you finally sit down at 10 o'clock on Sunday night to fill out that application, and they ask for 4 references. Okay? You don't want to be reaching out to somebody at 11 o'clock on a Sunday night asking for their email or their phone number or their permission simply to be a reference. So having that prepared and ahead of time is really going to save you a headache. Okay? You do not want to lie. Okay? Everything on that resume needs to reflect yourself accurately. We kind of mentioned that before, but again, I want to make sure that I stress that again. And the last thing I want to talk about is the overcrowding your page with information. There's a lot of controversy about how long your resume should be. 1 page, 2 pages. It really depends on who you are, what your work history is, how much work history you have. The one thing I say is don't use a small font. Don't think that you have to use 8-point font and 1/2-inch margins to try and cram everything onto 1 page just so you get it on 1 page. If I have to get my readers out and look at your resume, probably not going to do it. Okay? I don't want to work that hard. So if you have to go on to 2 pages and use, 11 or 12-point font, absolutely fine to do it, as long as everything that you're including on there is relevant information. And again, depending on where you're at in your work history, your work career, your resume is going to be a little bit longer. So just be very careful with that. Now, what I have given you is some very basic guidelines for a resume. These are the things that I have found in talking with employers throughout the Kansas City metropolitan area that they want to see on a resume. If you are looking for samples and other resources, you can go to Career Central at mcckc.edu, sign into your student account. There's lots of resources on there. My contact information, my email is there. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me or any of the other career services at the other campuses. I hope you found this to be informative, and I look forward to working with you later.